Okay, so in concluding 2.1, you should have outlined each of the different shapes, right, following the guides that are kind of below here. This is kind of some pictures of all of those below. But keep in mind these steps, right? Selecting a shape, using thin pins or thin pencils to draw it, and then continuing with an outline. So what we're going to do today is we're actually going to enlarge this shape here. And I'll show you how we're going to do that on a new separate title block. So in order to do that, we're going to have to start with a fresh title block. As seen here, I've got my paper squared up. I'm actually going to tape down my paper to make the use of my triangle a little bit easier, and you'll see why. So this is Isometric 2.1. Now remember, when you see me using red, that means you should be using a light pencil. A light pencil means an H, a 2H, a 3H, or a 4H that you might have, not any of the heavy B lead pencils. So the first thing we're going to do when starting this shape is we're going to start at the bottom corner. Because remember, isometrics are equal with respect to both sides. There's no horizontals in here, only verticals and diagonals at a 30-degree angle. So I'm going to begin grabbing my triangle, and I'm going to start right in the middle of my page. So we're going to eyeball it, and there's no measuring yet. We'll get to a measuring eventually. So the first things I want to do is I'm going to create some points. Right, I'm going to create some back points that define this shape. Those are the kind of major points I want to follow first, right? That's boxing in the whole idea. So we're first going to create a rectangle like that. And here's how I'm going to do that. I'm going to grab my triangle, and I'm just going to go a rough distance. I'm not going real far, I'm just going a rough distance. Okay, now I'm going to go vertical, because basically here I'm just creating that face, right? That's an angled face. Now whatever length I did there, I need to make sure that's the same vertical length elsewhere. So I'm going to go ahead and make a couple more lines. These are all 30-degree lines. These are just projection lines. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at these faces, and we're going to try and draw these faces one step at a time. So the first thing I'm going to define is this face. Well, all the verticals are going to be the same, so let's make this an even 2.5 inches. So we've got a vertical line at 2.5 inches. I'm going to do the same thing over here, 2.5 inch vertical. We'll even make that 2 inches. So we'll come back here. This is why we're using a light pencil, because we can switch that to 2 inches and terminate the shape up here. So we're going to go 2 inches from our other side. Now notice I'm just hugging a line that was created by the 30-degree rule. And that's what isometric is all about. So now I'm going to go 2 inches over here. And then what I'm going to do is connect these with my 30-degree triangle. Notice I'm either drawing vertical lines or 30-degree lines. And notice how much easier my T-square makes this for me. Okay, so that's our first step. We've just shown these two faces. Right, but now we need to show that top face. Well, the top face follows the same rules as the other faces. In other words, if we go 30 degrees from the back corner, right? All of our corners project out at 30 degrees. So notice how these lines cross, and this point here lines up with this point here. So you can see where we're starting to create these faces. Alright, well now we've made the three main faces, so we need to create rectangles inside of these. Now here's the trick. In order to make these rectangles even, we're going to have to do a few measurements, and this is where it's going to be important that you taped your paper down. So I'm just going to come down 1 inch from the top and the bottom and make a dot at each point. Now you're going to see why this is important to use a light pencil. So I'm just going a 1/2 inch here, a 1/2 inch here. So you get some marks. I'm going to go a 1/2 inch here. I'm going to go a 1/2 inch here as well. And now I can take and make my connections. Very, very light lines. These are my subdivisions, if you remember from obliques. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Notice these are just light projection lines because I'm going to do the same thing on these angles. I'm going to come in a 1/2 inch here, in a 1/2 inch here, in a 1/2 inch here, and in a 1/2 inch here. And you'll see why. To do that, right, I'm just measuring a 1/2 inch, making a dot, coming in a 1/2 inch here, making a dot. 1/2 inch and another 1/2 inch. Same thing on the other side. 1/2 inch, and now we make verticals down. These are very light lines, remember. If you've taped your paper down, you only have to measure this once. Now you'll notice I'm only drawing a little bit of a line to define just these inside zones, because now we've made an inside rectangle. So we can darken that in, because we now have a rectangle. And you'll notice we're kind of slowly creating the shape . Alright, and I'll do the same with the other side. Remember, we did start with just a crate to begin with. Okay, so now we've got our subdivisions, and we want to do one more for the top. Well, the good thing is we've marked these dots from our other lines and these, so we can just project those lines at 30 degrees. And you'll notice, since I'm making an inside rectangle, I'm not fully extending these lines all the way. Okay, so now we've created all of the basic faces that represent here, here, and here. But this is still a pretty flat shape. We need to define that depth. Okay, and to show that depth, we're going to have to do some 30-degree lines off of the corners for the sides here, because we're basically going perpendicular now to create the depth in the isometric. So what we're going to do is we're going to project 1/4 inch lines in 30-degree direction right here. Now notice, I've flipped my triangle, and I'm going to go ahead and make just a very light line so that I can come back and measure it. Or you can take your scale and you can measure a 1/2 inch across here. So that means I've drawn a 1/2 inch line there. Once you've got that 1/2 inch line, go ahead and make a vertical from the corner and connect down with a diagonal . And so what we've created is kind of a shelf here, a bottom shelf. And we're going to do the same thing on the other side. We're going to come in a 1/2 inch and we're going to project a vertical and a diagonal. Remember, it has to be, there we go, in this direction here. So we're going to project a 1/2 inch . Okay, then we're going to connect those. Notice how I'm flipping my triangle and using my T-square to help really line things up and make this drawing go fast. So now we've created our bottom lips. That would be these here. And now we need to just create that last top lip. This time we're going to go vertical because we've got to show depth in this direction. We can actually look at the inside face of the block here. So we're going to measure down a 1/2 inch. And then we're going to make our diagonals. Notice no horizontals. I'm just flipping my triangle from one side to the other. And there's our shape. Now we could look at this shape as being made up of more of a grid of cubes, which means all these projection lines we made would be continued around the shape. So it would start looking a lot more Notice how as I start to subdivide the shape more, it gets more definition as a volume made up of blocks. And so you see there how this begins to look a lot more like cubes. And then we could even start subdividing it further. But now that you've completed this shape, the only thing left is to darken that boundary around the outside of the shape, just like you see up here. So that's when you get your heavy pencil, and you still use a straight edge. Don't sketch at this point, because otherwise you'd be defeating the whole purpose of all the drawing we've been doing with our tools. I'm just following the outside of the shape. So notice how these are all connecting to form the outside. And the last bit of darkening we want to do is those openings inside of the shape. So I'm going to go ahead and darken in those as well. Notice how I'm just flipping my triangle back and forth from 30 degrees one direction to 30 degrees another. Thus, really important while you tape your paper down and work on making sure that you show the differences in line weights. There we go. And I'm going to keep going to really add all the features of the object. And now, the last part we could do is we could come back and further define all of these edges to really make the shape pop out. And it's up to you how you show this part. You may do less or more, but as long as you've got some different line weights, it'll be a successful drawing. And now we've completed our three-dimensional shape. It falls right in line with this object here. So this would be isometric 2.1. All right.